Jaylen Brown with the flush. Tatum the drive. Tatum the finish. It is banner 18. The mission commanded is mission accomplished.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and we're here with another episode of You Got Boston. To discuss the potential move of a WNBA team to Boston, we have a special guest, Emily Adams of the Hartford Courant, who covers the Connecticut Sun. Emily, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a long week, but happy to be here.
It has been a long week. So, Emily, you've been covering the Sun for 2 years now, right?
Yeah, this is my second season with them.
And for those that don't know, the Sun were really good last year. They were a championship contender, made it all the way to Game 5 in the conference finals. And then this year, it has been pretty much a race to the bottom, it feels.
Yeah.
They're not intentionally tanking, right? They're trying to win games, but it's just been a little bit of an uphill climb.
Yeah, they're just in a really bad position talent-wise, quite frankly. Like, that's sort of the biggest issue. There's 2 players on this team who were on the team last year, 1 player on the team who started training camp with the team last year. Whole starting 5 left in free agency, including 3 multi-time All-Stars. They only signed 1 kind of major free agent, which was Tina Charles, who, is in her 14th year in the league, is kind of, past the prime of her career. And they're just super, super rookie heavy. I think they have 5 rookies right now, plus JC Sheldon, who's a sophomore. So they're super young. They have a first-year head coach who is coaching in the WNBA for the first time. He got hired with no WNBA experience. WNBA's never had a European head coach before. So it's just a lot of newness. And the pieces are, I think now we're starting to see the pieces come together a little bit. But it took a really, really long time to get to a place where it was even sort of functional.
I did not realize that's the first WNBA head coach who was a European coach.
Yeah.
It's a lot. There's a lot going on. And obviously, I loved covering this team last year. And I thought they had a really kind of cool identity and style of play. And you have a brand new identity because, like you said, Olivia Nelson-Ododa, that's the only player that was at training camp last year that's still on the roster, right? So heavy rebuild year, which is funny. I interviewed Morgan Tuck in the offseason, and I think it's like, you don't want to say the word rebuild. But if there's ever a rebuild, it's this team right now.
Yeah.
So with that being said, despite the fact that they have been, one of the worst teams in the league all season, there's still a lot of interest in purchasing this team. I think everybody recognizes that the short term is not the long term with WNBA franchises right now. And we got news this past weekend that the Boston Globe reported first that Steve Pagliuca, one of the current owners of the Celtics, who had tried to buy the Celtics unsuccessfully, put in a bid to buy this team from the Mohegan Sun tribe for $320 million, plus putting in $100 million for practice facility. And the initial story felt like everybody was kind of taking it as this is going to happen. There was a disclaimer in the story that said that, this transaction had to be approved by the WNBA. But since then, there's been a lot of reporting, I know you've been on top of this as well, that has suggested that this might be a little bit more challenging than just the tribe and Steve Pagliuca have agreed. And now there's going to be a WNBA team in Boston in 2027. So what's the latest that you've heard regarding this potential move? And, how the feeling on Saturday in Boston was like, okay, there's going to be a team here. And I don't really get that feeling anymore. So I'm curious what you've been hearing from living in Connecticut.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, Jen Rosati's phrasing was that it's not quite at the finish line, and it feels like it's quite away from the finish line now. I think there's been so much sort of conflicting reporting about it, which has been really interesting to kind of follow. I think the latest sort of breaking news was a couple days ago from Annie Costable at Front Office Sports, which was that the Boston Group's offer was actually presented to Kathy Engelbert, the WNBA commissioner, back in July. And that offer was never brought before the Board of Governors. So unclear kind of what happened there. But I do know there was a period of exclusivity with the Boston Group that expired because it wasn't brought to the Board of Governors. And now this bid from a Hartford Group, which is led by Mark Lazary, who was a former part owner of the Milwaukee Bucks. And he's kind of an interesting character. He's been trying to get into the women's sports space for a little while. He tried to buy a couple of teams in the NWSL, Angel City, and then the North Carolina Courage unsuccessfully over the last couple of years. And he's from West Hartford, still owns property down in Westport, Connecticut. So that bid is also exceeding $300 million from what I've been told. It also includes plans to build a practice facility somewhere in downtown Hartford. The arena in downtown Hartford was recently renamed from the XL Center to People's Bank Arena, is currently in the middle of, I believe, like $145 million renovation. So they're sort of using that as a selling point of that being the new home for the team. So I think right now it feels like those are kind of the two options. Is either this Boston bid will get pushed through or they'll remain in Connecticut with this Hartford bid.
Interesting. And there hadn't really been buzz about this Hartford bid at all before the Boston group came out, right? Did you know this was in the works?
This was a much more recent development for me. I'm not sure how long they've been sort of putting that investor group together.
Yeah.
I know like the governor of Connecticut, Ned Lamont, has been talking, I think, for a couple months about a potential bid that he'd been in conversations with a group that was interested in trying to keep the Sun in Connecticut. But I think this all, once it leaked that Boston was sort of saying it was a done deal, I think there was sort of a push from the Hartford group side of things to be like, no, it's not. There's still, our offer is still on the table. We're still in negotiations. And I think it's been interesting, the league's reaction to the Boston news leaking, I think also kind of gave the Hartford bid a little bit of a boost because it, again, this is me speculating, but it seems like the league, like a relocation to Boston is not necessarily what the league wants right now.
Yeah, that was pretty clear, I think, from the statement that was put out just a couple hours after the story, where they basically said they didn't put together an expansion bid. There's other teams that are ahead of them. I know Houston is one team that's come up a lot, and Kathy Engelbert has brought them up. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're one of the next teams, if there are going to be kind of more expansion teams. But because we already have all the rest of the bid secured, you're basically saying there wouldn't be a team in Boston until 2033 at the earliest. And so my thinking was, it doesn't really make sense to sell the Sun. You can't do Boston and then you're forcing them to go to Houston or somewhere else, and then you don't have a team in New England. But this Hartford group kind of changes that, because you would have a New England team. It would be in Hartford, and it sounds like they have the amenities needed to have a professional women's basketball team. Do you live in Hartford right now? Or you live near Hartford?
I live a little bit outside, yeah. But UConn plays at the formerly the XL Center. So it's, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know that they in the immediate, like they would have to build a facility and everything. They would have to do a lot of land zoning and things to figure out where all of that's going to go. But I do know that they've been at least in conversation about those things. And the XL Center, or People's Bank Arena, they're home to, they host UConn home games. They're also home to a minor league hockey team. But the summers are pretty open for them outside of sort of one-off events and things. So, there's a sort of a feeling that it wouldn't be difficult for them to accommodate the Sun in the way that it might be more difficult for TD Garden, in April, May, when you're still dealing with, NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, there are days covering the Celtics where, like, that night they're switching the basketball court to a hockey rink, and it's back and forth, and concerts are getting rescheduled and all of that. So I can imagine logistically that time of year will be difficult. And obviously UConn, you covered UConn year round. They have a great fan base, and I feel like that would not that they haven't traveled to the Sun, because I do feel like there is a lot of overlap, right, in the two fan bases, but absolutely. It would be even more natural if it's like in the exact same spot. So most of the listeners of this podcast, and most of the people that I've been talking to are, trying to get this team in Boston, because that's the hope. But I'm curious from your standpoint, like, what is the value of keeping this team in Connecticut? Do you think there is value? Like, just obviously there's pros and cons, but I know there's a women's basketball legacy in Connecticut that sometimes can be left out of this conversation a little bit. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, I think that's honestly the biggest thing, is that you have this sort of very reliable existing fan base in Connecticut that, sort of starts with UConn, but the Sun have had a a super, again, like loyal, reliable following pretty much since they've been at Mohegan. They've relocated from Orlando in 2003. And they've always had very steady attendance. They're averaging their highest ever attendance right now, even though they're the worst team in the league. They sold out of season tickets this year for the first time ever, even though they're the worst team in the league. And everybody kind of knew they were going to be the worst team in the league coming into the year.
Right.
So, it's, you have that sort of pre-existing, you have sort of a guarantee that people will show up, I think, to an extent in having them be in Connecticut. I know obviously like their one-offs at TD Garden have been incredibly successful. But I think there is a question of sort of like how much Boston fans will show up in like a regular game by game basis, just because it's an unknown. You don't have a big sample size to really know that, and it's proven in Connecticut. I think the other thing too with the team being in Connecticut is that the WNBA is kind of all Connecticut has left. It's all Hartford has left. There's still people are still upset about losing the Whalers in the NHL a few years back, and so I think like especially even just what I'm hearing from like the government side of things, like people, they really care about keeping pro sports in the state. And this is kind of their last like tether to a major pro sport, I think. And so I think, if they were to lose the Sun to Boston, I think it's hard to see a path where, Connecticut ends up having another major pro sport kind of in the near future. And the conversations about Boston as an expansion team are really interesting to me, just because we talked to Kathy Engelbert before the TD Garden game this year. And she had said, and we'd asked her, do you think that a Boston team and a Connecticut team could coexist? And she was basically like, I don't know. Like right now, probably not, basically was her answer. But I think the thought maybe is that, in 8, 10, 15 years, if the league kind of continues to grow at the rate that it is, you could have, two teams that are that regionally like proximal to each other, be able to exist, be able to both kind of be sustained and have their own independent fan bases. When you look at like the NBA having like multiple teams in New York, multiple teams in LA.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of an interesting wrinkle to it for me, if the league is really sort of married to Boston being an expansion site rather than, a relocation destination.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that was one of the things with the statement where it felt like they were penalizing Boston for not putting together an expansion bid. But I'm like, who would have picked Boston as an expansion bid when you have a team in Connecticut that's like up for sale / like everybody kind of sensed that it was going to be up for sale, when there are so many cities that don't have any team in their area. And so like, I get it from like a process standpoint that maybe it would have just been like a good due diligence move to just put together that bid. But I talked to a bunch of people in Boston that were, interested, hopeful to bring a team here, and nobody really viewed expansion as like the best vehicle. I think everybody was aware that the Sun were going to be up for sale and that was the perfect opportunity to move them. And then you can keep the fan base as like, it's still New England's team. And I don't know for certain, but Steve Pagliuca's statement alluded to New England, Rhode Island, Governor McKee's on board. And it's felt to me like maybe they're going to try to not make it like the Boston team, but more like the New England team, and having some more regional ties and all of that. But I probably would agree with Kathy that it would not be very wise right now to have a team in Connecticut and in Boston. When the Connecticut, they haven't played in front of NBA arenas, so we don't know what that would look like, trying to fill up that. And also, like you said, everybody loved the 2 Boston games, but at the end of the day, when you have one a year and you have Jaylen Brown doing a block party before and all the hype and momentum, but it's like a one-time thing versus, Tuesday night against the other bad team in the league, like, are people going to show up for that? I don't know. I hope so. I think so. Everybody's been saying that they will, but it's one thing to say that. And then we see like a lot of teams in the WNBA have not had great turnout, despite the fact that they're in big markets. So it's not always representative. I'm curious, do you view the Valkyries as because the Valkyries have had, just an incredible first year as far as turnout, culture, the arena atmosphere, everything. And I think there's this feeling of the Warriors' success maybe helped that a little bit as well. Like the same thing happened with the Celtics in Boston. But do you view that as like an anomaly, or how do you, or is this going to be how every expansion team feels like it's going to go?
It's definitely not how I would be shocked if it's how every expansion team. I mean, the Valkyries are already they're on track to be like the most successful expansion team, like first year expansion team ever in the history of the league.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's after they've lost like 2 major players to injuries and things. So I think what's happening, like, I think the Valkyries were such a perfect choice for this kind of starting this new era of expansion for the league, just because the Bay was so primed, I think, to have women's basketball. You know, it's a region that frankly, like, loves women's sports. They've had an NWSL team out there that's been super successful. It's like a very queer area, so it really appeals to the WNBA fan base. And then you have such a deep basketball culture there with the Warriors, with just kind of, you know, the city of Oakland, of San, like that whole area. I feel like it has such a deeply entrenched like love of basketball, and it has the population to back it up. You know, they're selling out Chase Center literally every single night.
Right.
So it's, you know, I think they were just sort of uniquely positioned to be as successful as they've been. And I think they've exceeded even like the expectations that people had coming in. You know, I think next year with Toronto and Portland, those are, I think, are going to be more representative, or going to give a better sense of like what this next big round is going to look like, with, you know, Detroit, Cleveland, and Philly coming as well. Because, you know, I think those are both, you know, Portland is a former WNBA market. So it's sort of a question of, you know, can they kind of resurrect what they had there before after that team folded? And it's, you know, kind of a similar thing, like in an area that culturally has really loved women's sports, has supported women's sports. Toronto is, you know, a brand new sort of frontier for the league. They've played one-off games up in Canada, but never, you know, had like a large sample size. So I feel like those two are kind of more in line with what, you know, the typical expansion team is going to look like. And they might replicate something close to what the Valkyries do. They might all be selling out every night, but I think it's so hard. I feel like the Valkyries are setting an unrealistic standard for everybody right now.
I know.
In that,
because
like,
I'm turning my TV on and I'm like, I want this in Boston, but it's like, we don't know that that's going to be the case in every expansion city. And like, I think you said it best, like Toronto and Portland are going to give us a more representative sample. Like, is one going to be a lot better than the other? Just like, we need a couple examples here, because it's been so long before there's been an expansion team that Golden State is like kind of all we know. And so that makes everybody want to get an expansion team, because from a financial standpoint, that was an incredible investment for them. We're already seeing that. But then also just like, I think about Veronica Burton, who we both covered last year on the Sun, like what a move that was for her to be left unprotected, selected in expansion. She's having like a, you know, borderline all-star season, you know, most improved player candidate, maybe even front runner, and playing in front of like a massive crowd where people are wearing her jersey. Like, it's just a great brand exposure opportunity too, which I wanted to ask you, because I remember last year, Dejanay Carrington who was on the Sun at the time and now is on Minnesota newly, but she said, you know, we want this kind of atmosphere every night. Like, we deserve this all the time. And I know there's been some sense from Connecticut players that they would like to move to Boston. PrizePicks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. On PrizePicks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports, combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, and much more. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports takes into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. What's your sense there with the players that are, you know, on this team right now? Obviously, like, there's going to be a lot of turnover in the next few years, but do you get a sense that they really want to see this Boston deal go through, or is it not something that they're kind of keeping quiet? That's been my impression from previous years, but I would imagine it's pretty sensitive right now too.
Yeah, I think mostly for like the players, I think are in a position where I think a lot of them would like to see it in Boston, quite frank. Like, Sanaya Rivers, who was drafted in the first round of this year's draft, is on a rookie deal for the next 4 to 5 years with the team, has kind of looked like their rising star. Like, she's been pretty
Yeah.
explicit. Like, I'm a city girl. I loved being in Boston, playing at the Garden was awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I would love to be there full time. And a lot of them, a lot of these players, like, especially for someone like Olivia, who's been around for years, to even like Tina Charles, who came in this year, who was with the Sun back in like the mid 2010s, got drafted there. They've been experiencing sort of the lack of resources that the Sun have for years now, and watching kind of the rest of the league slowly but surely kind
Yeah.
of pass them by. You look at even like 3-4 years ago, the Sun were not an outlier in kind of the lack of facilities that they had, in the size of the arena. Like, that was very much the standard around the league. The Chicago Sky are still, practicing at like a public gym type space. The LA Sparks are still practicing at a public gym type space. But what's become an issue for the Sun is that there's no sort of forward trajectory right now. Like, there's no, Chicago has broken ground on a $40 million facility. LA has a plan in place to build a facility. Dallas has a plan in place to build a facility. So all of these other teams that have been under resourced and have not had kind of the same level of investment as, these top, your Vegases, your Phoenixes, your Seattles. The Sun have not kind of kept up with being able to promise those things to players, and that's why
Yeah.
that's why their free agency suffered so much this year. You look at Alyssa Thomas and DeWanna Bonner are both in Phoenix, which has $100 million practice facility. Bree Jones is in Atlanta, which has access to a pro level practice facility in the Core 4 complex they practice at. Dejanay went to Dallas, which had plans to build a facility, now is in Minnesota, which shares a facility with the Timberwolves. Ty Harris is in Dallas, which has plans to build a facility. So it really matters a lot to players that they are getting treated like pro athletes, because this is the first time that they've ever had the opportunity to be. And so I think it's hard to go back to having less when you know what else is out there.
Right. And I remember last year, and just so people know, like, they share a practice facility with like in the tribal community center. So there was like other things that happened there. I think it was you that posted a photo last year that has since become kind of like a milestone moment almost,
Yeah.
where in the middle of a series against the Indiana Fever with Caitlin Clark and all the hype and record-breaking viewership, they had a practice that they shared with a toddler's birthday party, right? And so they only had was it half the court that they?
Yeah, they brought down the very middle school gym, brought down the divider, and they had,
And this is
and
like
that's still a thing.
yeah, and it's like I think back to I went to public high school and I was on the basketball team, and that would never happen. And I was at a public high school. We were really bad. We never made the playoffs. Like, nobody played in college after. And so you think about these girls, these women, like, they've played at such a high level for so long, and you go to college where you have these amenities, and then now you're
Yeah.
drafted, and then you take a massive step back. Maybe the first time in your life that you're in that position, if you went to high school that you had good amenities and facilities and things. So the good thing is that as soon as the tribe put the team up for sale, it was obvious that this was going to be rectified. Whether it's going to be in Hartford or in Houston or in Boston, this team is going to be sold to somebody that builds a practice facility and gives them the amenities they need. And it was ridiculous because I covered Unrivaled. Unrivaled is the off-season 3-on-3 league that Nafisa Collier and Brianna Stewart launched this summer. And I was there watching Alyssa Thomas working out in the gym, and I was like, she doesn't have this in Connecticut. She's the franchise legend. And obviously in the middle of that, actually it was the day that I was there that she signed with Phoenix. So I was thinking, like, that's obviously something that is of utmost importance, but that's going to be rectified regardless. So that's the good news. It sounds though like the players would like to be in a major media market like Boston for like some of the off-court opportunities, I would imagine too, because that's the other thing. Like, as much as you want like the nice courts and everything, besides for that, like playing in Boston, playing in LA, playing in a lot of these media markets, like, Veronica Burton now, I think she could probably get deals and things off the floor that she just couldn't have gotten at Mohegan, regardless of whether they had built a new center or that sort of thing. Does that come up, or is that just kind of an implicit, understood thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's something Jen Rosati talked about a little bit when she spoke about kind of addressing all of this before their last home game. It's especially with young players coming out of college, like the NIL era is allowing kids to come into the league, these like 21, 22, 23-year-old rookies with, massive like personal brands and
Yeah.
really like dedicated followings to that, like not just to the college team, but to them as individuals. Like even you look at like Sanaya and Anissa, who were late first rounders, were not sort of the, Angel, Paige, Cambrink, Caitlin, like caliber of fame. And even they came with, again, like super developed like personal branding, a ton of, opportunities with brands and, with external sponsorships and things. And, I think it's hard, it's hard when like you're watching your friends get drafted to LA and New York and you're, in Uncasville, Connecticut. I think Hartford, obviously Hartford's a much smaller market than Boston is. I think Hartford is like comparable to some of those other like smaller city markets that are popping up. So I think it would be an improvement over, being kind of down on the coast where they are now. But yeah, I mean, I think especially for young players, I think it's hard to argue that Boston is not a better opportunity, a better place for them to kind of continue to develop that personal brand than, being in Connecticut would be. And I think a lot of them like do care about that. And I think as, these next couple of draft classes progress, as NIL continues to become, a bigger deal, as women's college basketball become a bigger deal, I think I think it's going to become a much bigger factor, and it's going to be hard to retain talent, once they're at the end of those rookie deals, to kind of attract free agents in who are young and have star power.
Yeah, and so we'll see what happens. I had Gary Washburn on earlier this week. You can check out that episode on CLNS Media for those of you watching. And I asked him for kind of a temperature check on like where he felt like things were headed. And I think he was still leading Boston, like it's still going to happen, despite some of the roadblocks, despite some of what's popped up. Where's your heart at? If you had to guess right now, if there's going to be a resolution, and again, for this is not reporting, this is just you're just kind of giving me your intuition. You think this is going to be a Hartford move, a Boston move, or somewhere else altogether?
Yeah, I mean, my pure speculation is I feel like I feel like we've been hearing Boston for so long. It feels weird for it to not be Boston at this point almost. And I think with Boston, again, it seems to me like the Tribe clearly, prefers that offer to some extent. Like that offer, was the one that was presented to Kathy first. It's the offer that leaked first, as being something of a done deal. I think everyone involved except for maybe the league would like for it to be Boston, and so that kind of, from a gut sense, makes me feel like we'll probably get there. It will get to the finish line eventually. The league will kind of get over whatever misgivings it has about Boston not having put in an expansion bid. But I like, neither would surprise me at this point, I think. But it feels like Boston makes the most sense, particularly as a home base. Like I know they've talked about, in those early months when the Celtics and the Bruins are still using the Garden, of having games in Providence at their arena. I don't know if that is something that would extend to Connecticut at some point too, if this bid ends up falling through. But I do think it's it just sort of is the most like major hub, I feel like, to kind of reflect this modern era of the WNBA. I feel like they've sort of outgrown. I mean, they've certainly outgrown Uncasville. And I don't know.
That's the thing. People might not realize that it's not just Connecticut so far, it's Uncasville. Like that's different than living in Hartford. I know from going out there, it's like I can't find anything. It's kind of like the middle of nowhere. You're basically just in the casino, right?
Yeah.
And so that's even Hartford would be a change from a lifestyle standpoint for a lot of the players.
Like pretty significantly, quite frankly. It's Uncasville is like, sort of like, yeah, it's kind of like in the woods. It's, you know, you're like
crazy.
right off of tribal land. So it's a lot of, yeah, just like nature. You're near the beach, but it's not, you know, it's not like an urban population center in any
Right.
sense of the word. You're, you know, an hour.
So it
and
feels like
change
it has
from
a
the nearest
ceiling.
airport.
Like
Yes.
it has a ceiling for how much, you know, how big the fan base can grow, how big the engagement can be, because it's just not that many people living there. Like even if the average person there really cares about the Sun, not that many people living there. Like that's kind of the challenge to date. So we'll see what happens here. I'm intrigued by the story. I'm curious about the Hartford piece because that was not on my radar at all. My thinking was either it's going to stay, you know, in the same spot, it's going to move to Boston, or it's going to be picked up by another completely other team. But now the more I think about it, it's like, are they going to really not have a team in New England in the prime of like the league's expansion? So that would have its own downside. Emily, anything you're working on, anything you want to plug to viewers that are trying to get more into the Sun right now? I think a lot of Celtics fans are thinking like, if this happens, I want to start locking in a little bit, watching this team, you know, starting to kind of consume some of the media around here. And I feel like you do some of the best work covering Connecticut.
I think another thing that like kind of leads into this is that like the Sun are already on TV in Boston. Their local TV deal is with NBC Boston. So they're easy to find for fans who are in Boston already. But yeah, I do pretty regular. They're on a road trip right now. But once they're back home, my coverage will pick back up a lot more. Just on current.com. That's where you can find me. And on Twitter. But I'm trying to use Twitter less because I don't like it. But yeah, it's, you know, I think the team's going to look very different next year. Even, you know, they're staying at Mohegan next year, obviously, as they've told season ticket holders. But like I said, the CBA is up for renegotiation at the end of this season. That is going to see just about every player who isn't on a rookie deal hit free agency, because everybody's just kind of been signing 1-year deals in anticipation of this happening. So pretty much everybody is on the market this offseason. So there's going to be a lot of movement, hopefully both in and out. I think, you know, if they make a decision on this, that's going to shape a lot of how their free agency looks. So yeah, I think that's
a big part of it. Like if you know you're moving to Boston, you can pitch that to free agents, and you're going to be, you know, a brand new practice facility. Like it won't be like it was last year where you're kind of scrambling.
So yeah, it's going to be, yeah, I think this team, obviously they're all but mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. They're sort of, you know, just trying to continue developing the young pieces this year. But next year, like I think, yeah, nothing. Just because they're the worst team in the league this year does not mean that they're going to be the worst team in the league next year. I think, you know, truly everything can change once we start next season, once we hit free agency this year. And that's all also pending whether the CBA even gets approved or not in time for all of that. So yeah, much to watch as we head into the fall.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like there's been a lot of discussion, misinformation, and I figured we'd have a good Connecticut local that can give us the perspective. And you've done such a great job covering this team. Hopefully I'll see you soon. I need to get to a game now because I haven't been to one Sun game all year. I know, I've been going to Liberty games as my home base because I'm like, at least, you know, the games carry a little bit more weight, but if they're going to move to Boston, I don't want to be a bandwagon where like the day they move, I start covering the team again. So I'll make a trip over to Mohegan soon, but thank you so much for joining. Hope everybody enjoyed. Subscribe to the You Got Boston podcast. And you can also check out our conversation with Gary for a more Boston perspective as well. Thank you.